you very much. Thank you for the kind invitation. I know most of you are tired, so am I. So let's start with some fresh up. Before the rise of ISIS, there was a proverb coined in Lebanon saying the Sunnis have America, the Shias have Russia, and the infidels like myself have Allah. So now, as you can see, that Iraq has Jihadistan in the north, Shiistan in the middle and the south, and Kurdistan northeast. It's three divisions, de facto three polities, one way or another. It's just like in Libya. We have failed states in Libya, we have a failed state in Syria, we have a failed state in Yemen, we have a failed state in Palestine, if I may say so, so it's termed authority, Palestinian authorities. So this is all about failure of nation building. Failed states are about failure of nation building. Now, I'll dwell just briefly on that and go into the details of the Iraqi experience or Iraqi past. Nation building, has two aspects. One is building the state as a system of governance. And nation building is building the same state as a representative of the national community. These are two different processes in heterogeneous societies. And since we have 8,000 linguistic groups worldwide, if nationalism is based on language or race or religion, if you add to 8,000 linguistic groups, we are in trouble. We have only less than 200 states in the world. This is a big dilemma. So in homogeneous societies, inclusion of the segments of society into the state may produce conflict, but these conflicts would be horizontal, meaning conservative with liberal, with this and that. They don't question the legitimacy of the nation state. In heterogeneous societies, when you have Kurds and Arabs, Jews and Arabs, this and that, then any flaw in the system of representation and inclusion in the state would question the legitimacy of this state, nation state itself. Now, we all know that Iraq as a nation state was built in the 20s, 1924, actually. The first parliament was elected, we had a cabinet, and then King Faisal was inaugurated. The British had in their mind a constitutional monarchy led by an Arab Muslim of noble descent. And these four components actually represent four major forces in Iraq society. First, we have the British occupying power. Second, we have the tribes who cherish lineage. And we have clerics, notably in Najaf. They are conservative Muslims who also respect sacred lineage. And we had also the so-called Sharifian officers, the Iraqi Arab Ottoman officers, who served under Faisal in Syria and fled after the French invasion. They were the bearers of Arab nationalism. So all these elements actually were reflected in this composition of the new polity. Now, and there was an umbrella, it's called Iraqi nationalism. It was born in 1920, exactly in Baghdad. It was the initiative of a Shi'i merchant from Qadimiyya. His name is Ja'far Abu Tamim. He's the father of Iraqi nationalism. He joined hands with some elites from Sunni groups, Sunni merchants, although they are little in number, and they started agitation in Baghdad. And they were instrumental one way or another in the 1920 revolution against the British, the first anti-colonial massive that cost the budget some 40 million pounds at that time, which is a tremendous amount, and thousands of casualties on both sides. So the British found this Iraqi nationalism ready hand and relied on it, actually, after quelling down the rebellion, relied on it to create an understanding between the two major groups in Iraq, the Shias and the Sunnis. And they also tried to make a side agreement, side accommodation with the Kurds, because Iraqi nationalism at that time was negligent of the Kurds. And actually, there is a meeting between Sir Percy Cox and King Faisal, in which he lamented this new kingdom. You are giving me a new kingdom? I have bin Saud myself. Bin Saud was the Wahhabi monarch, newly prince actually at that time. And I have the Iranians to the east, and to the north I have Kemal Atatürk and his Turkey, who hates me and are against me. I fought against them. And then on top of that, you're taking the Kurds, who are Shafi'i. You know, Sunni Islam is divided to 4 schools. One of them is Shafi'i. And King Faisal himself, coming from Al-Hijaz in Saudi Arabia, he's also Shafi'i. I say, if you take them, what would I rule? How can I rule this? It's impossible. And Cox agreed. So this British arrangement, a Shia, Sunni, Iraqi nationalism with a sidetrack of accommodation Kurds. That was the bargain, and that was it. But Iraq was a pre-national entity. It was an agrarian society. We had no communications. Cities were closed behind walls, just like medieval cities. Tribes in the rural areas, they are statelets. Each tribe has its own army, its own territory, which they are guarding, you know, jealously guarding these borders, fighting with each other, cutting routes of commerce and so on and so forth. It was total chaos. How can you build a new nationhood without all the effects of the commercial or the industrial age, as we call it, or the age of modernity, with its communication system, with its integrated market, cultural systems, what have you? There was nothing of the sort. So they started building it from scratch. There were 2 tracks followed by the occupying force and the local elites. I call them the mandate state and the native state, because there were the state had 2 heads. Of course, the stronger part was the British, but still the other part was not superfluous. It was also crucial. So on the side of coercion, the creation of cabinet, constitution, flag, all the symbols, material institutions and non-material symbols of nationhood. Coercion actually acted against all centripetal forces, and we had tremendous. But these did not question the existence or the legitimacy of the nation state. They simply recognized their own autonomy and wanted to guard it jealously, one way or another. So we had rebellions by certain tribes. They were bombed by the British. We had rebellion by certain Kurdish tribes. They were bombed. We had a rebellion by the Assyrians. They were also bombed. The last episode was in the early 40s when we had this Mahabad Republic, the Kurds. It was bombed. So this line of coercion, of violence to establish, enhance the force and the power of the new state was used. But the other line is more important. That line alone would not have been enough. The whole, edifice would have crumbled down. What's the other line of building the nation? First, you had a polity that was liberal. It was open to all. In the parliament, we had Kurds, Arabs, Shias, Sunnis, Jews. They were called Musavites after the name of Prophet Moses, and the Christians were called Nazarites. So we had 2 deputies from each community along the lines of the old millet system, but still in a new liberal framework. And then we have the opening of a new market economy. the market economy in Iraq of the 2030s was predominantly, but not exclusively, a Shi'i Jewish market. So thriving business mercantile classes, and then new industrial classes emerged. Then the last and most important, I think, is the maker of Iraq as a nation state. At that time was the creation of a new landlord class. The state in the Muslim world is the owner of all landarai, as you call it. All land belongs to the state. And the old feudal system was temporary. You had possession of land to use it, but you don't have ownership. There is a difference between possession and ownership. Usufruct, call it, in the documents, like economic documents. So you can use the land, and this land does not belong to you. It can be taken out from you and given to another landlord. The British stopped this. They turned the land into real estate, into real ownership, not possession, not temporary ownership, but permanent ownership. And they distributed geographically and evenly. And this class, we should estimate it. We should see its real importance in this. 76% of the population at that time were rural and were all tribal, apart from a few chunks in Kurdistan. They were just villages ruled by warriors, tribal warriors. So what we have here, centripetal forces, ignorant, oblivious of the very notion of nation state, taking part actively into this process. And if you look at the structure of this landlord class, which is so much, discredited by leftist and nationalist literature, you look at it, 48% of it are Shias, 20% Arab Sunnis, 18% Kurds, 10% Christians, and so on. I mean, the whole, it's an image of Iraq in, the most dominant social group at that time, the landlords, the chieftains, the tribal chieftains, and some urban-based rentiers who had, some interest in land. So what we take from that is that the more we move on, the less coercion there is, and the more peaceful integration there is. From the 40s onwards, with the exception of the expulsion of the Jews, 1948, there was no violent or coercive action taken against any ethnic or religious or communal group, not whatsoever. And the flourishment of ideological politics from the 40s onwards, of communism, socialism, Arabism, that was in itself a proof that Iraq was moving away from the old conception of local identity to a new identity, because the very concept of workers against capitalists or peasants against landowners in itself implies that peasants are everywhere peasants. They are one class in one. The reference point is a nation state. And capitalists are all capitalists all over the place. So the very, flourishment of this ideological politics is a testament to this success in nation building. And again, market economy, a strong landlord class, liberal polity put together, you have, a reasonable result. But that does not mean, we don't have political turmoil. Of course we have. There's class war, there's cultural war, there are people who are conservatives, liberals, centrists, what have you. It's all over the place. What happened after 1958? And this is a turning point. I consider Iraq's regression into turmoil started at that point. Although my sentiments are Republican, not monarchical. Can I have some more? So what happened, if we believe what Batato said, that 1958 was a middle-class rebellion, because actually middle classes, modern middle classes, the very creation, the very offspring of this modernization process initiated by the monarchy, were excluded from power. And bit by bit, the political system was closed, was authoritarian. The parliament was abolished, the constitutional court was abolished, the upper house was abolished, parties were not franchised. And then another step, the government started what we call the public sector, that is command economy. Now combining political power with economic power. And this aggravated bit by bit under Saddam Hussein. Under Saddam, we had a totalitarian model, in the sense that Franz Neumann, in his Behemoth, defined, and what Hannah Arendt also defined in her Origins of Totalitarianism, as a racist, ruthless, lawless regime. And we had successive wars, command economy, oil rent, made Saddam Hussein and his regime, actually. The oil boom in 1973 coincided with the nationalization of Iraqi oil. And there you have a government that holds political power, economy, and revenues, oil revenues, vast oil revenues, that detach it from the power relations of social wealth. And nobody, taxes went down to less than 0.something%. And there was the politics of gifts, of the gift, al-makruma. You get a contract from the government, that's makruma, that's a gift from the government to you. You're not entitled to pay taxes. The only thing you are required to do is allegiance. And during the wars as well, there was a big crisis. And the decline of Arab nationalism was actually completed in 1991. It was started in 1967 with the defeat of Nasser. It was completed in 1991 with the defeat of Saddam Hussein in Kuwait. The country was, was a wreck. More than $400 billion were spent on the war. 500,000 killed or maimed. I don't know how many, I can't remember how many were POWs in Iran, and so on and so forth. And all what has been built, this kind of thing that was built, was demolished. And Iraq was thrown back into the Stone Age, as many reports described it. And at that time, even Saddam realized that Arab nationalism was not working. The Kurdish revolt was, again, Shia Islamism was on the rise. Islamism was on the rise. And there was a shift from ideological to identity politics at this point. And identity politics, this is a global phenomenon. I mean, in Europe, we had a shift from ideological to issue politics, as many political scientists pointed out. In the Arab region and beyond, perhaps, we had a shift to identity politics. And identity politics, by definition, questions the very legitimacy of the nation state, and subnational politics become the politics. I'll stop here. I mean, if you want me to continue for 2-3 minutes, I wouldn't mind, but...
depends on the audience. So one of the former
okay. So when the Americans came, the British did build Iraq on this Shia-Sunni understanding or agreement with sidetrack, accommodation sidetrack with the Kurds. The Americans reversed it. They built it on a Kurdish Shia agreement with a tiny little sidetrack to accommodate the Sunnis. And that was really a horrible result, simply because Baathism was equated with Shiism, which is not true, by the way. And there were mid-course corrections along the road. I think it was started by one of the US ambassadors, Khalil Zad, but most vigorously pursued by General Petraeus to calm down the situation. And that strategy of mid-course corrections enabled the Americans and the new Iraqi government to dislodge Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was there. After the withdrawal of the Americans, the incumbent or the ex-prime minister, Nouri Maliki, he unraveled all these arrangements at a time when he had, a strong drive towards over-centralization and a supposedly decentralized and federalized polity. And then he started also a campaign of personalizing power structures, bringing his sons-in-law and his son and others, from his village. I once visited the prime minister's office. I thought I was in the village, in his own village, just like in the old days. Under Saddam, you go there, you see all the members of his village at the entrance, inside, everywhere. And this unraveling actually is what caused this traumatic shock, really. It is reported that no more than 250 of ICE people took over Mosul, and 1/4 of Iraq is now under their control. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.